going to be kind of monitoring that as we go to make sure that everybody's questions get addressed at the end. If you have any technical difficulties, you can also just reach out to me personally, change it from the word from everyone in the chat box to Amy Sullivan, and I can answer your questions as well. And that's really all there is to it. Just make sure you're muted. Looks like everybody is pretty much muted. And we'll be able to unmute you if you want to speak at the end, or we'll just read the questions off. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the lovely and talented Judy Abdo to introduce Kevin.
Thank you, Amy. And welcome everyone. This is McKeown. This is the Climate Action Network. And we are having, I can't remember how many meetings we've had. Is this 3 or something like that? And today, Kevin McKeown is going to be speaking and then answering questions. So I think he's been given a few questions in advance, so he'll probably be addressing those in his speech, so to speak. And then we'll answer questions as we have time. Kevin has been on the council for a lot of years. He'll tell you how many. And he has always, from the very beginning, been a strong supporter of everything sustainable, environmental, and regarding climate action, climate change. So he's somebody to listen to when you hear him speaking from the city point of view about those issues. And we're very pleased to have him speaking to us today. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you and go for it.
Well, thank you. And I think I'm unmuted. I think you can all hear me. You know, Judy said I've been on the city council a long time, and I'm sitting here very sobered by the fact that as I look at your faces, I realize I have probably been on the city council longer than at least some of you have been alive. I was elected in 1998. And one of the very first things I did was work on getting all of our city facilities on 100% renewable electricity. That's over 20 years ago, and we did that in 1999. And every city facility in Santa Monica has run on 100% renewable electricity all that time. One of the very first things I worked on. I also sat as the council liaison to the city task force on the environment for over 10 years, which meant that every month I was at that meeting absorbing the incredible knowledge and expertise of those who served on our task force and carrying that to the council. I'm going to take a moment here to clear my throat, sorry. So I do have a long background on this. And of course, one of the questions that you reasonably have to have in these times is, does the city of Santa Monica still, with the pandemic and the economic collapse, take climate change and sustainability and the environment seriously? And I'm here to tell you that we do. The book I've been reading most recently was actually given to me by a former city attorney of the city of Santa Monica, Marcia Moutry, who helped write our groundbreaking sustainability rights ordinance. That actually has been almost taken for granted here in Santa Monica. It's the old thing about a prophet in his hometown, but it's actually made big waves internationally. And our former city attorney is now working as a volunteer with a United Nations group on pursuing sustainability rights using the Santa Monica ordinance that she helped write as a model. So we've had a huge influence. We hope to continue to have a huge influence. But I'm here to admit that we've not done anywhere close to enough. The book that I'm reading that Marcia gave me is called The Uninhabitable Earth. It's by David Wallace Wells. And it's one of the most frightening books I've ever read. I'm going to read you just the very first paragraph of the first chapter of that book, talking about climate change. It is worse, much worse than you think. The slowness of climate change is a fairy tale, perhaps as pernicious as the one that says it isn't happening at all, and comes to us bundled with several others in an anthology of comforting delusions. That global warming is an Arctic saga unfolding remotely, that it's strictly a matter of sea level and coastlines, not an enveloping crisis sparing no place, leaving no life undeformed, that it's a crisis of the natural world, not the human one, or that those two are distinct, and that we live today somehow outside or beyond, or at the very least defended against nature, not inescapably within and literally overwhelmed by it. That wealth can be a shield against the ravages of warming, that the burning of fossil fuels is just the price of continued economic growth, that growth and the technology it produces will inevitably engineer a way out of environmental disaster, that there's any analog to the scale or scope of this threat in the long span of human history that might give us any confidence in staring it down. Long, complicated sentence. And I'm going to pause now so we can cry. Here's the worst part, really. This is not a historic phenomenon. This is not because somebody shoveled coal into a steam engine invented by James Watt at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's nothing like that. More than half of the carbon emissions from the burning of fossil fuels in all of human history have been emitted in just the last 30 years. In other words, after we should have known better. And here we are in 2020, perhaps a little bit diverted by the pandemic, but with so much work yet to do. And it's not a question of political will. It's a mandate. I mean, I am tremendously upset at how far behind we've allowed ourselves to fall. And Santa Monica has done a great job in leading, but it takes so much more than we can do. And it's also not just a matter of political action. It's a matter of getting people, individual people, to be willing to live their lives differently. And we can only do so much of that as a government. Now, we're certainly going to try. I know there's a lot of concern about the fact that we've had to cut some of our programs, and I think cut's the wrong word. We've put things on pause because we had to. Let me drop back a few months. When the pandemic hit, Santa Monica was particularly affected because much of our revenue comes from hotels, restaurants, the sorts of things that rely on people traveling, going about freely, being in public, the very things that were stopped cold by the shutdown due to the pandemic. By the time we started to look at our budget, which we had to adopt in June, we had projections that we'd be down over the next 2 years by something like $224 million. That's not spare change. And we have to adopt a balanced budget by law. We can't print money. We don't have a press somewhere in the basement of City Hall where we can turn out fresh new 20s. The federal government can do that. And we're certainly looking to the federal government for help and hoping that it may be there after this election. But for the time being, we're in tough shape as a city. We had to let go almost a quarter of the city's entire workforce when we adopted the budget. And this includes people I've worked with for 20 years. This was a heart-wrenching thing we had to do, and there were tough choices to make. And if it had been my preference, would I have in any way reduced or put on pause any of our sustainability programs? Of course not. But we had to make choices. We had to do things like let libraries close and let librarians go. We had to let go crossing guards. I mean, this went across the entire city. But the commitment we did make as a council was what we'd work on bringing back first. And among those were certainly our sustainability and environmental program, because that is not an option. Look, we're staring in the face the most serious crisis the human race has ever faced. And we have an idiot in the White House who is not willing to confront that, which leaves us at the local level responsible, even more responsible, for doing everything we can. So we're still working on all the things that you've come to know as Santa Monica leadership policies. We're still working on water self-sufficiency. We're still working on zero waste. We're still working on all of our carbon neutrality goals. The timelines have had to be extended, which is absolutely wrong. in the light of what's happening with our entire planet, but inevitable due to the capabilities of what a city can do and having to balance the budget. So in the near term, we've had to adapt and focus on economic recovery and community resiliency. But here's what we're continuing to do. And I know this was one of the things you were, as a group, particularly interested in. Our early investments in water conservation and alternative water sources, where we were really ahead of the game, are going to support our ability to achieve water self-sufficiency. Now, it may come a little bit later. We had some setbacks and we had to raise our water rates to be able to afford to do this. And I got to compliment my colleagues on the council. That was a politically very brave thing to do. It was very unpopular with many people in the community for us to raise the water rates, but we had to do that to be able to become water self-sufficient, which actually will save us money in the long run, but the short run is, that's where voters remember you on November 3rd. So all of our water conservation policies, our programs on water neutrality, all of our landscaping rebates, those are ongoing. Those support the outcome that we've already made a commitment to. You know, we've adopted, I assume you know that we've adopted a 10-year climate action and adaptation plan, widely criticized because of the price tag, but of course it's actually not a separate price tag. These are things we were already planning to do that are put together to give us some metrics and some goals. Another one of which is achieving zero waste. Now, I don't know if you've had the same experience I have, but during the pandemic, people are having a lot of stuff shipped to them instead of going out to stores and buying. The city many years ago, another one of the programs I supported early on the council, put out free recycling bins in our alleys. And that was before that was common. Those blue bins are shared by neighborhoods, and they immediately reduced our landfill by 11%. But now in the pandemic, we're having problems because people can't be bothered to break down the boxes from Amazon, flatten them out and put them in the bin. So the bins end up overflowing, which then means that people take stuff that they could have put into the recycling bin, which is overflowing, and put it into the landfill. So we are facing factors not under our control that are actually forcing us back in some ways on some of our programs, but that doesn't mean that we've in any way given up. The real challenge I think we're facing is changes in the global recycling market. It used to be that there was a market for many of these materials, and it was primarily China that made a shift in policy that just took the bottom out from under that recycling market. So we continue to struggle with what to do with the materials that we are able to collect as far as recycling. And we are continuing to focus on regulatory compliance. There are things that we have to do by law, and they're becoming increasingly difficult and expensive to do. One of the things that we've led on is carbon neutrality, and we have a goal, adopted goal, to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 or sooner. Having just read the book that I quoted from, I think that that is far too late. And we're going to have to accelerate those efforts, but it's going to be doubly difficult. The state has commitments to carbon neutrality. We are working on energy decarbonization. You may have seen that we passed a change in our zoning code where all new buildings won't have natural gas. They'll be electrified. And since we have now 100% renewable electricity for the entire community, that'll make a big difference. Natural gas is actually mostly methane. There's a certain amount of leakage in natural gas. It's argued to be 4 to 6%. Methane is about 80% as bad a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. So continuing to allow methane to be piped into our homes, where it then in being burned emits formaldehyde and other things you really don't want to have in your breathing air. That's a bad idea we're not going to allow in the future. We're working also toward the electrification of vehicles. We have a big program to put in EV chargers. And one of our signature efforts has been the electrification of the big blue bus. I was privileged back in November of 2015, the last time I was mayor, to represent Santa Monica in Paris at the COP21, United Nations Global Climate Change Conference. And I wasn't just there as a sightseer, I was there to do a presentation to international audiences on behalf of Santa Monica about how we are electrifying our big blue bus. At that time, we had a target of 2035. Since then, we've actually sped it up. We plan to be electrified by 2030. And in a moment, I'll tell you some more about what's going on there. And of course, the electrification, both of buildings, the big blue bus, et cetera, only makes a difference if we're not burning coal or oil or, God forbid, nukes to get that electricity. And I'm very proud of the role I've been able to play in something called the Clean Power Alliance. There became an opportunity in the state of California for communities to, rather than buy the electricity from an investor-owned utility, create their own entity to buy renewable energy instead and sell it to their communities. And Santa Monica worked on that for several years before we finally hooked up with LA County, and now with Ventura County, and now with 29 other entities in LA and Ventura County to form the Clean Power Alliance. And through the Clean Power Alliance, we are now able, and have been since February of last year, to provide Santa Monica customers with 100% renewable electricity. That almost overnight reduced our greenhouse gas footprint as a community by 17%. And I'm really happy to say that about 90%, I think it's 90% of the business customers and 89% of the residential, or maybe I have that flipped, but hey, it's 1%, who cares, do opt for the 100% renewable, which we made the default. Now, I have to caution you, not everybody believes in what we obviously do. There is at least one candidate who's currently running for the city council, he's not an incumbent, who has proudly said that he bought the dirtiest level of electricity, that he resented the fact that we opted people into, that his poor older mother couldn't afford the few pennies extra, and therefore they're using the dirtiest possible but cheapest electricity. So there's still work to do even within our community to educate people on how beyond crucial, critical the climate change issue is, and how important it is that each of us get involved and participate. I told you the Big Blue Bus has some changes coming. Let me pull something up here for that if I can. We know that besides the use of power, the transportation is the biggest air quality issue, and carbon into the atmosphere, global warming. And we're living in a car-centric society. So our city has made some concerted efforts over the years to move us toward a non-auto-centric future. Now, we've had the Big Blue Bus for, I think, close to 100 years. I think they started in 1928, and we're finally converting those to electricity. During the time I've been on the council, there have been conversions along the way. When I came on the council, our Big Blue buses burned diesel. When a Big Blue Bus went by, it left a black cloud behind it. The first step was we went to biodiesel, which is generated out of waste. It's not fossil fuels. And then after biodiesel, we went to compressed natural gas. And then we went to recycled natural gas. And now we're taking that final step. So the Big Blue Bus has been a big player in the improvements. The other thing we work on is mobility in general. And the council continues to do that work. Just last Tuesday, a week ago, we made some amendments to our bicycle master plan so that we'll be putting in 19 miles of protected bikeways, not just green painted bikeways, but bikeways that are actually separated from the road to make it safer. What does that have to do with global warming? Well, the more people feel safe bicycling, the fewer people will be driving. The fewer people driving, the less crap we're putting into the air. It's that simple. So administratively, even during this pandemic, with the reduction of staff, we've been looking at ways to be more efficient in what we do with mobility and the Big Blue Bus. And our city manager, Lane Dilg, has just announced that we are going to merge our mobility division, which formerly was part of the planning department, with the Big Blue Bus. Now, what that does is it leverages the strengths of both. The Big Blue Bus is very good at getting grants from Metro and from federal funds as well, getting additional funding. They have their own communications department, which can now talk about all of our Santa Monica mobility projects. We have 2 sets of very knowledgeable professionals on our staff who now will be working together as a team. We'll be able to use the Big Blue Bus technical staff and their maintenance staff for project implementation before it had to go through planning and public works. So we're pretty hopeful that this is going to be an acceleration of the good work we've been trying to do, even at a time when we have fewer staff and less resources, which is our challenge. And this will actually be coming before the council. I just approved the agenda yesterday on the 27th, our next council meeting, 1 week from today. So we're not dead in the water, but it's not a time when we should have had to slow down. It's just tragic. And of course, this kind of pandemic may actually become more frequent as climate change happens. The tropics are moving northward 3 miles a year. Ecosystems are changing. Diseases that are carried by various vectors we haven't seen before are coming north with those vectors. So we don't have any time. And this is not, at least in Santa Monica, a matter of your convincing your city council that this is an important issue. We are really blessed right now with 7 council members, all of whom get it and are willing to move things forward, and in fact, sometimes push staff faster than staff says they can do the work. What we do need, and I think that this is probably why this meeting was convened, is as much as we can, much more community support. So at some point here, I'd like to talk to you about volunteer opportunities. But at this point, I think I've been going long enough. I should probably take a break and see what your questions are. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. We have one that actually fits with the electrification. So Elizabeth asked, what about electrification of our trash trucks? How do we get rid of the tourist sightseeing buses that are running diesel down on our residential streets? And then I wanted to add to that as well.
I've already got 2 questions on the
floor.
Okay. We're working on things like trash trucks. The problem is that the really big vehicles, it's hard to get the electric, getting the electric buses was a big deal. You know, we've had an electric bus on the street now since August last summer, over a year, and it has been very successful. We've rotated it on different routes to see how it works. It does everything that an old-fashioned bus could do and more. It's been a wonderful purchase. We have 18 more we've already ordered. The first of those will be coming to us next April after some testing. And so within a couple of years, we'll now have about 1/10 of our big blue bus fleet. That's not hard to say. Our big blue bus fleet electrified. And the goal is we're going to electrify them all. But that kind of engine that operates that kind of big vehicle, that technology is still evolving. So we have to wait for someone to be able to manufacture a trash truck that runs on electricity. We would love to have one. And as soon as it is, I'm sure we will. The other question was, how do we get those diesel spewing tourist buses off the street? The problem there is that's state law. Those buses run on routes that are approved by the state, by the I think it's the Department of Transportation. And you know, their vehicles, they run under state law on state streets. So we really don't have much local power to do much about that. Okay, so that was the first 2 questions. Now go on to the rest.
I mean, I was gonna just add to that. So if it's state law, what can we as citizens do to push that? Is that calling our state representatives or?
Well, we have a tremendous ally, and I hope you know this, in our state senator, Ben Allen, who has carried all sorts of environmental and sustainability legislation. What is possible on the state level, I don't know. I made a conscious choice in my life not to aspire to any kind of state office. I love being in Santa Monica, being of service to Santa Monica, living where I make the decisions and getting to see what the decisions are. So that informs me on my next decision. But Ben was a skyrocket. He took off out of Santa Monica from our school board. I almost talked him into running for the city council, but he ran for state senate instead. And he's been a wonderful state senator. So I would urge you to get a hold of his office. And he's right now in the process of preparing bills for the next session. You know, they had to cut back their bills this last time because of COVID. They had very fewer bills they could carry. But I think next year they may be able to carry more bills, and he may be very interested in this.
Very cool, thank you. We have one more question that is fitting with this segment because it talks about a little bit more detail on recycling. So Daniel had asked, what are the issues, what about issues of food waste and plastic waste beyond recycling? As we know, recycling is extremely inefficient, nearly a hoax in the scheme of things in its routing and shipment, et cetera. So how can we eliminate these issues before they emerge as such?
The last few words you said are key. I think you said before they emerge. That is what we have to figure out how to do, folks. We can't just do all this remedial stuff forever. We have to go to true cost pricing, where the true long-term impact of the use of certain materials is more clear at the time we make the choice to employ those materials in what we purchase or what we do. For food waste, we shouldn't be worrying about how to dispose of food waste. We should be reducing food waste. We should be finding ways that if restaurants have extra food, it gets to the people who need it. We should be eating smarter. I mean, I've been a vegetarian for many, many years. And if you just look at what it takes in terms of water and power to produce meat as opposed to a plant-based diet, we need to start being smarter about that sort of thing. Plastics, I mean, now our other representative, Richard Bloom, has done some really good work on plastics, as has Ben Allen. And the question is, if you use them because they're cheap and convenient, are you willing to take responsibility for what happens? In that book I told you I'm reading, I think it says that by 2050, there'll be as much plastic in the ocean as there is fish. Think about that. I mean, all that stuff is going someplace. So the answer is not to figure out what to do with it after we used it. The answer is to stop just using it without thinking about the impacts and make informed choices and find other ways to live our lives without killing the planet that we depend on for life.
Great answer. I concur, especially with the food waste and the plastic. It would be nice if there was a tax for things that were, or something of that things that were.
That's what I mean by true cost pricing.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
We essentially are subsidizing the death of our own planet by hiding the cost of the materials that we choose to use. Sorry, I don't mean to get angry, but.
All right, well, we had one more question that was kind of a addition to the diesel, and it just says, do you think idling ordinances enforcement could help with the diesel from the tour buses?
Well, yeah, it would to some extent. And I think we do have actually in place idling ordinances. And that's not much to ask of people if you're stopped for a couple of minutes to turn off your engine. But that doesn't really solve the bigger problem, which is that we continue to have vehicles on the road driving every day. And it's not just tour buses that are doing horrible damage to air quality and in the long term through greenhouse gases to everything else that's tied together with global climate change. So again, we're not looking at a situation where there are easy answers. We're going to have to do some pretty damn tough things to make the kind of change we need to make in time that some of the younger people on this call get to live their lives in a world worth living in. I have an incoming phone call. Excuse me just a moment. Okay, I just turned it down. If it's one of you calling, sorry.
It's the magic of Zoom life. Did you have another segment that you wanted to speak on, or should we have a couple more questions in here? I can go either way, but.
Well, at some point, I'd like to make a rather detailed pitch for volunteer opportunities. And I know that everybody on this call is already engaged, and you're probably all doing something in these fields that you're interested in, but it might help to know what some of the other things are, because maybe you have friends who'd be more interested in some other aspect that you yourself aren't. So as long as you give me some time at some point to do the volunteer opportunities, I'm happy to take questions all day.
Okay, well then let's move on to a couple more questions. So we have from Tara says, Mayor, your efforts are truly impressive. My question is regarding decarbonizing existing buildings. Does the city have a plan on how to help landlords decarbonize buildings?
That is a longer term goal, and one that we will have to probably wait till after we get restaffed and have the resources. It is fairly expensive to do that, but it's more than fairly expensive. It's unacceptable not to do that. Now, obviously, buildings have a life, and so all the buildings that were built with gas infrastructure will eventually no longer be in use. And if they're adaptively reused, that would be the point at which it would make sense to do this. Whether we'll ever be at a point where it's economically possible to go back in, I mean, I'd love to have. I've lived in this apartment for 45 years. I'd love to have my landlord come in and say, "I'm going to pull out all those gas lines and electrify you," but I don't think hell's going to freeze over. So I can't do anything about it. I don't own the building. It'll be a while before we see the change. The fact that we've now said in our building code that in the future, all new buildings must be non-natural gas, must be electrified, that is a really meaningful start.
Very good. Okay, I think I have 3 more questions, and the third one I think is going to lead us into the volunteers thing. So we have from Daniel, could we establish an infrastructure around compost system and a city support system? And the choice should just be an individual one, or should the choice be an individual one or a citywide one?
I'm not sure we haven't had some program like that. In certain parts of the city, besides the black and the blue bins in the alley, we have green bins, and those are for plant waste, landscaping, etc. And I do believe that's being used for composting. I personally can't attest to that. I know we have a couple of city staffers on this call. I don't know if any of them are involved with that program. Maybe they've all disappeared. We've moved on to 2 screens. We're a bigger Zoom group.
Actually, Drew
Actually,
has
Shannon
answered.
Perry is on the call, and if anybody would know, Shannon would know.
Yeah, I can add that, yes, there are green bins in the community where you can put your residential food waste in those bins. In addition, we do have commercial composting for pre-consumer food waste in our business districts. And the city is going out to bid for additional contract services for residential composting in the coming months. So there is a priority on organic waste collection and a residential compost program.
Thank you. That helps a lot. Okay, let's see. Keep moving. So we have, okay, how are communities affected by urban heat islands being supported through the pandemic, and how will we adapt to the risk of having cooling centers and other support systems in place during the pandemic when we start experiencing excessive heat once again?
Well, cooling centers have been a little less urgent in Santa Monica than in other areas. And I've become a little bit more aware about the air conditioning load differential between coastal cities and inland because I'm on the board of the Clean Power Alliance, and we're watching what happens when these heat waves hit. And there'll be spikes of electric usage inland that we don't see in Santa Monica because it is, for the most part, cooler. I do not have air conditioning in my apartment, so I'm not going to be turning up the power on a hot afternoon to cool my apartment. I'm going to sit here with a fan and sweat. But it doesn't get as hot as often here in Santa Monica. So we haven't had cooling centers in the past. And I don't know that we have any plans to have them in the future. That was part 2 of a 2-part question. And I'm going to need some help going back to the first part.
So it was how are communities affected by urban heat islands being supported, and then the cooling center?
Well, I don't know what it means by supporting the community. What we're trying to do is reduce the urban heat island effect. And there are things that can be done. There is white roofs. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. If you have a dark roof, it absorbs more heat than if it's white and reflective. There are also new paving materials out there. Asphalt typically is very black and very heat absorbent. And what happens is it heats up in the sun during the day, and then it radiates that heat back at night. So the city never gets to cool down and becomes even hotter the next day. So as we move forward, the materials we use for street paving could make a huge difference. Cities are a mixed bag. On the one hand, on the whole, a dense city is a much more sustainable way to live than set out in the suburban sprawl. But cities also do have side effects like the heat island. Now, Of all the issues that Santa Monica has to work on, that has not been one of the most critical for us because we're blessed with the natural air conditioning of the sea breeze most of the time. But it is an issue that we are aware of. I know that we've studied various materials. I don't know that Public Works is employing them yet, but that's definitely something we're aware of.
And it looks like Peter he's a green and healthy homes realtor. Peter, did you want to mention the two things that people can do to save energy and utility costs dealing with heat, or do you want me to read? Unmute yourself if you want to read them. I can't see you. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read them. Peter, if you can jump in if you want to interrupt and expand, but he's saying, I find that most people don't know about some of the things that they can do in their homes to save energy on utility costs. Two, I would like to mention our heat pump water heaters and replacing gas burning stoves with induction stoves.
Well, certainly one of the things that we who are sort of in the know compared to the general public can do is to help our neighbors know that there are programs. Both Southern California Edison and the Clean Power Alliance offer all sorts of programs to help people, conserve energy, use it more efficiently, et cetera. And yes, there are many technologies that are far superior to what most of us have in our homes now. I have to caution, I don't think technology is going to solve our global crisis. I don't think we're going to engineer our way out of this. But anything we can do right now to conserve energy, to conserve resources, to be more thoughtful about how we use the resources we do have. If you know of something that works, share it. I mean, this is a great organization for sharing the information. The city will help share information. The more we all know, the wiser the decisions we'll make.
I wholeheartedly agree with you that it's not all tech, but tech helps. Do you know if those organizations that you just mentioned help with permitting to get the water pumps?
I'm sorry, the question was.
Lorraine was just saying, I'm trying to put in a heat pump. There are widespread concerns about permitting. Can that be fast tracked? I don't know if you.
Well, it's a complicated web of state rule and local rule on things like that. I'm not personally involved in permitting. That's done at the administrative staff level. Again, if she's still here, let me see if Shannon knows anything about that, because the permitting is usually done through the planning department. And that's one of the areas where we could do better is coordination among our departments. Shannon, have you been in communication with anybody on that?
Good. Thank you for directing the question to me. I'm actually going to hand it off to Drew Johnstone, who leads the building electrification work for the Office of Sustainability, and he'll be able to give you the most up-to-date information.
Sure. Thanks, Shannon. And thanks for the question, Lorraine. So when you're upgrading your water heater, typically a plumbing with an electrical permit are required. And that's, again, just for, building and safety needs to, review a site plan, knowing where the heat pump water heater is located, as well as seismic bracing. They need to know about the specifications of the equipment and ensure that your main electric panel has a sufficient panel rating to power the heat pump water heater, which typically requires a 20 or 30 amp breaker. There also needs to be a disconnect, and Title 24 also has some specifications about the efficiency of the equipment. So these are some basic things that our building safety department needs to review when installing equipment like this. So that's why the permits are required. And I know our permit staff, tries to work as quickly as possible, and it's kind of a first come, first serve situation. So unfortunately, I think some lead times are, it could be 2-3 weeks. But I think everyone's trying to streamline as much as possible. And I just want to ensure that, we're encouraging electrification. So I'm going to do my part to meet with building safety on a regular basis to see if there's opportunity to have some sort of streamlined permitting for building decarb measures like this.
Thank you. That helps a lot. So we had one person ask about composting, and Chris said that there's neighborhood composting centers on Pico. I lost it. Sorry. So we have, but they are, here, Pico Market, community compost drop off. And then we had a question Ethan wanted to ask about the Ethan, you want to unmute yourself about the Playa del Rey gas storage? And then after that, we have one more question that'll lead into volunteer, and we'll get rolling on that.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for taking the time. This week is the 5-year anniversary of the Aliso Canyon gas blowout. And as I'm sure you know, we have a gas facility right in the area of Santa Monica too at Playa del Rey. Just recently, city council members in Culver City and City of Los Angeles, Daniel Lee and Mike Bonin, have introduced resolutions calling on the governor to shut down the Playa del Rey gas facility. And also some Democratic clubs here in Santa Monica, including the Santa Monica Democratic Club and the Santa Monica Progressive Democrats of the Santa Monica Mountains, have introduced resolutions calling on the same. And I was just wondering if that's something you think that Santa Monica City Council might be interested in doing as well, of passing a resolution urging the governor to shut down that facility and help move the state of California and also, off of gas, but also protect residents of Santa Monica from something like Aliso Canyon.
We wouldn't have to necessarily pass the resolution because that's probably already covered by adopted city policy. And this is something, Bayona, that I've been working on since before I was on the city council. I was a Bayona activist back when we were trying to keep Playa Vista from being built and retain all of that open space as essential wetlands. I'm sitting right now on the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission, which is a state commission that oversees, obviously, Santa Monica Bay, but has some involvement with what is going on at Bayona. And this is a discussion we're having there right now. There are a dedicated number of activist groups who have come to us again and again with complaints about this gas field. And to pull out a little bit, look at the bigger picture. Currently, there is a proposal to so-called restore the Bayona wetlands by essentially dredging them and making them into a saltwater marsh instead of a freshwater marsh. And there are allegations that one of the reasons for this is that it would preserve Southern California Gas's ability to have that field there. So this is something I personally oppose. I've been a very vocal person on the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission about that. I can look into whether we could lobby against that field or we don't usually do it by resolution. We have direct firms that we work with, but I'd be pretty sure that our adopted policy already would cover that without there having to be a separate vote from the city council.
I'd love to connect with your office around that, because in terms of the similar resolutions which are going, and just talk about how that could be possible.
Well, let me give you the person you should connect with, because she handles our legislative stuff for the city council. Her name is Stephanie Vanakis, and her email address is her name. If you want to email me, I'll just give you the email address now. stephanie.vanegas@smgov.net.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'll definitely reach out.
Thanks, guys. And then, okay, so we have a question from Jerry that I think will be a good segue into the volunteer opportunities, because Jerry was asking what can be done to keep the important work of our Urban Forest Task Force going?
Well, it is going, and it will continue to go. And one of the main things it's working on right now has been a passion of mine for many years, and that is a law limiting what people can do in cutting down trees on private property. We obviously have an urban forest plan in our city. We've planted thousands of street trees and maintained them. But when somebody decides to develop a residential parcel primarily in Santa Monica, they will often clear cut the lot just for the convenience of being able to do the construction more easily. And many cities have put in place laws that say you cannot do that. If it's a significant tree, that tree is part of the urban canopy, therefore it's part of the Commonwealth. It belongs in a way to the entire community because it shades things, it cools them down, it cleans the air, it's habitat for wildlife. And we do not yet have that law. That's the thing that right now the Urban Forest Task Force is working on. We had a situation on California Avenue where a tree was that people tried to landmark it. And I'm very sympathetic to saving the tree. I want to save the tree, but that's not what the landmark ordinance is for. This particular tree just didn't fit the definitions needed. So we desperately need that law. And the Urban Forest Task Force, like our other boards and commissions right now, has the same difficulty we all do, as demonstrated by the fact that we're meeting on Zoom. It's really hard to do these things, with the added problem that for a city task force or committee or the city council, we operate under a state law called the Brown Act. So we have to do meetings in a certain way. They have to be staffed by our staff. They have to be open to the public. It makes it really hard right now. The fact that we're not meeting, though, doesn't mean that the work isn't ongoing. It is.
Great. And this is I'm thinking this is a good opportunity to segue into how we can help, how volunteering get us pumped on how we can all do our part.
Before I go there, I know there was a question in the chat about, can the infrastructure in Santa Monica handle things like the electrification? So let me clarify. The power is bought for Santa Monica by the Clean Power Alliance. And yes, we can scale up and buy more renewable power. The infrastructure, the wiring, the transmission is still under the control of the investor-owned utility, Southern California Edison, because to duplicate that system of miles and miles of copper wires would just be impractical. So we have to continue to work with Edison to make sure that the infrastructure is expanded as necessary to handle more electrification. But more critically, we have to move away from the model where electricity is generated 100 miles, 200 miles, 500 miles away and gotten to us on a long, dangerous, fire-causing transmission line. We need more distributed energy generation. And that's one of the things we'll work for. And that's one of the ways that we will solve that problem. The reality is that it's actually better for future development to be in cities where we have that infrastructure than to sprawl and eat up our agricultural and our wildland and make people drive even farther to get from work to their homes. One of the current city council candidates is saying we should not build anything over 3 stories high, because once you're more than 3 stories high, it's hard to be electrically self-sufficient. That is true. But is that the determinative factor? Well, no, it's not, because in actuality, you're worse off generating sprawl by building only to a low height and therefore building out farther and farther into the wildland than you are by concentrating your residences and your jobs and having an efficient electrical distribution system. So this is not always easy for members of the public to grasp. And that's why the political aspect of what we do can be so challenging sometimes. Now, where you can help, you don't have to deal with the politics. You're lucky. And I volunteered for the job, so I'll take it on. But there are a lot of things that you as individuals can do to help each other and to help the city and to help the planet. First and foremost, meetings like this, to continue to be aware of what other organizations are doing, what their policy work is, what their events are, how you can amplify each other's voices, social media, newsletter communications, cooperation. Now the city can help there too. The Office of Sustainability and the Environment has a newsletter that comes out the first of each month. And Shannon is probably the publisher. If she's not, somebody on her staff is. They'd love to include the work of any, community, environmental, or volunteer group. We also have programs that help our community specifically. And because we're leaders in sustainability, it's important that we generate the revenue to support that work. Buy Local and our Santa Monica Shines campaign are both things we're doing to encourage a strong economic recovery. The sooner the city has the money to rehire staff and to have the resources to do these programs, the better. I mean, it breaks my heart that we've had to put some of this work on hold. We also have a local green business certification program, and businesses that have won the Sustainable Quality Awards are ones that have invested in the environment and sustainability, and we should all be supporting those businesses. Get the word out about something we talked about earlier, sustainability rebates. From the Clean Power Alliance, from SCE, from other entities. Even the gas company has sustainability rebates if you want to deal in methane. these are things that people don't always know about. And if you can tell your neighbors about that, that's really helpful. The city has an electric vehicle charger rebate program for multi-unit dwellings. That has been a battle. I've been working on that since Ellen Corbett was a state senator, and I think she termed out in 2004. It used to be that only homeowners could put in EVs, and we had to really fight to allow multifamily buildings to have EV chargers put into their garages. And at first, it was only condos. And then there was an exception where you couldn't do it if it was a rent-controlled building. And then you could do it, but you had to have $1 million insurance policy. And only last year did we finally get to the point where it's now practical to put EV chargers into apartment buildings. Well, that's something people need to know about, and they need to know that we have a program to support them. I talked about my involvement with the Bay and the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Corporation. Our partners in that work is a nonprofit called the Bay Foundation. And if you down to the beach, just I think north of the Annenberg Beach House, you'll see a beach restoration pilot program we're doing where we've planted some native plants, and lo and behold, the natural sand dunes are starting to return. Why is this important? Sea level rise, keeping the water from coming farther on land. There are things that are being done. You can get involved with Heal the Bay on the work that they do on the beach cleanups. And of course, what you're doing is really important. And you can be piloting neighborhood level sustainability projects. You can share the results of the Climate Core Heat Island survey. Jerry talked about the urban forest and how important that is. Well, besides trying to save the trees we have, what about planting more trees on private property? Could we get people to do that in vulnerable neighborhoods? What can we do about mini farming? You know, is there a way to grow some food on land that we have the ability to have control of, private land? Our whole local energy infrastructure. I talked about how distributed energy distribution, energy generation is going to be so key. Of course, the sun only gives you energy when the sun is up, and often the prime time for electric usage is just at sunset and after. So battery storage is going to be a big part of our future. The ways we can improve the efficiency of the systems we have. And again, Clean Power Alliance and SCE both have programs for that. So there's a lot of ways for people to get involved. And probably the first way to get involved is to get in touch with Shannon, who is on the call and who was kind enough to give me her information to share with you all. So if you want more information on any of the stuff the city is doing, it's Shannon Perry, and she is our Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm going to give you a phone number, if that's okay, Shannon, do you mind? 458-2227, 310 area code, obviously, 458-2227. And her email, like all of us at the city, is her address at smgov.net. So shannon.perry@smgov.net. And let me say how fortunate I feel after all these years of working on these issues to have the kind of support I have and that our council has from city staff. We have an amazing team on these issues, more so than any other community. We are looked to around the state and in some cases around the world as leaders on these issues. And that's because we have great staff and because we have the support of the community. I mean, I said it's not a matter of political will. It's truly not. It's a matter of necessity that we move these things forward. But it certainly makes it easier for our city council, when these things cost money, to know that residents like you care enough to want us to do them.
Thank you, Kevin. That was awesome. We had one more question. Judy, do you want to ask about the task force for the environment real quick? And then I think we'll wrap it up.
Yes. When is the task force on the environment going to be meeting again? And how can we make sure that it doesn't go away?
The task force on the environment, which, as I said, I was the liaison to for over 10 years.
And I created it.
So we both got background with it. We both care. Like all of our boards and commissions, right now, because of COVID, it is very difficult to have in-person meetings. And the governor's order that allows Brown Act meetings under certain circumstances requires that they be urgent or necessary. So obviously, the city councils had to have meetings because we're dealing with issues every 2 weeks. Some of our boards and commissions have met because they've had matters before them that were urgent. The task force on the environment right now didn't have any urgent business to convene. They're still there. We are still very much reliant on their expertise. We are restructuring the whole way the city deals with boards and commissions. So if you want to make sure the task force on the environment comes back and comes back even stronger, as it must if we're going to survive this global climate crisis, when you hear that discussion is coming to the council on the restructuring of boards and commissions, please be a voice of the task force on the environment.
Trust us, we will be a voice. I think we're at the end of our time here. And Kevin, thank you so very much for your depth of knowledge and sharing that depth of knowledge with all of us in answering these questions and in your remarks. It's been very, very helpful. And I think that we need to figure out how to make sure that we can talk about climate change and other environmental issues in a way that the council can hear. And I know it's challenging right now with the way meetings have to be held, but I just want to say climate change is really important and is an emergency that we all need to be working on. So I think this is the choir that you're preaching to, and we will continue to do what we can to bring this issue forward whenever we can.
Look, don't let anybody tell you that sustainability is a secondary, unimportant issue compared to the crises that are facing us, that are right in our face. Yes, we're facing some pretty severe problems here in the city of Santa Monica with resources, with staffing, with all sorts of challenges. And we do have to provide basic services to the people in the city. But I hope you heard that passage I read. Be afraid, be very afraid, and help get other people to be afraid. If we don't make changes in how we live, we won't get to.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who has been a part of this, who asked questions, and we will do this again. So never fear.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Wow,
Thank you, Kevin.
it worked.
It did. I would love, so I really loved, Kevin, are you still here?
No, he's
Okay.
not.
I'm going to ask him if we can get, I took notes on the volunteer opportunities, but I want to get like, I think we could recap that.
We have
Be a great,
we have someone on the call who's, hi Leslie, are you still here?
hi Leslie. It's okay. I just think it'd be a great blog post to get out to people, just to say, here's some great ways. It's not private information. It's okay to share it. I think it'd be a great thing to just recap it as something that we share with our network out on social and in an email that just kind of recaps the volunteer opportunities. Hi, Leslie.
Hi. Yeah, I also took shots of the, I took screenshots of us. So I'll put that.
Oh, cool.
Put that up in the blog video folder that you created, Amy.
Thank you.
And also, remember we recorded this, so I can take a crack at capturing those volunteer opportunities, and I'll send it out later today. I'll put it also in the.
Yeah,
in
if
the
you just do it as a Word doc, I can turn it into a blog post and all that fun stuff. But I think that would be a really great resource for people. I think if Climate Corps' creative communications could have fun with it too.
they would really have fun.
Some TikTok, some reels, all that cool stuff.
Nobody wants to say something?
Yeah, I just got on late because I was on another Zoom call. So I missed a lot of what Kevin said. And you just recorded it. Is that going to be available?
Yeah, we'll send so since you've registered, we'll get the rebroadcast link and we'll email that out to you. So you'll be able to watch it from the beginning.
Okay, great.
And then we'll
And
eventually put it on our YouTube as well. So you can watch it whenever you want to.
Okay, well, I just found out about you all. You know, there's so many things going on. It's amazing. But I really appreciate what you all are doing. And Kevin, you know, has been doing this forever. I've been one of those people doing it for a long time too. And I wanted to mention, if any of you are interested, the Sierra Club Airport Marina Group this evening at 7 is meeting via Zoom, of course. And we're having a program on the Tonga presentation, sort of cultural and related to the land and the water. So it should be sort of special. You know, it's an unusual kind of program for us, but I don't know if anybody's interested.
How can we find the link? Is there a link for that on Eventbrite or a website?
Let me think. They have a big email list that they send out invites to, and it used to be posted in the Argonaut. So I don't know, I could send it to somebody, I guess. If I had an email address, would that work?
Yeah, here, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Okay. I could just send the invite over.
Here's our main, and then I'm stoked you found us. That's really cool. Are you following us on? Are you on our email list, or have you followed us on social or anything?
It's hard to say how I got here. So this is it, climateactionsantamonica@gmail.com.
Yeah, if you email that, if you want to be on our mailing list, just say I want to be on a mailing list in the email you send us, and I can add you.
Okay. And you know, I know Jerry Rubin from years ago too. You know, we've been doing this stuff for a long time, and Kevin, you know, he is so astute on a lot of things. It's great.
Yeah.
So, and I don't live in Santa Monica now, but I did for a while, and I'm still involved with the Biono wetlands and other issues down there, oil and gas. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
That's awesome. Yeah, send us your information. We'll get you on our list, and we'll spread the word about the Sierra Club thing tonight too. And
okay, great. Thanks
we're all
a lot.
in it together. Thank you.
Yeah, and what's your name?
I'm Amy. Amy Sullivan.
Okay, yeah, I see. Co-host. All right, thanks a lot. I'm gonna go then.
Bye, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Bye.
Okay.
Right. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah, that was really
Yeah.
wonderful. I think it would probably make good sense too to, like we did with the COVID meeting, we put it in the e-blast at one point.
Yep.
And so we might want to do a follow-up in the next, well, actually, heck, he mentioned he did, not by name, but he mentioned that one of the candidates does not care for the, for where we're going. I'm wondering if we need to get that, not that phrase, I don't know.
I'm going to stop recording, by the way.
Yeah, please. Do you have to stop the meeting?